Hey there, friends. Welcome back to Yanasa TV. So Shauna and I have been interviewing different women in meat production. We're trying to show some of the diversity that are in this field and maybe give some people some encouragement to look into it. As you know, it's essential to our food supply to have these people putting their neck on the lines to help make proteins more accessible to consumers, as well as help farmers be able to access the marketplace. So today we have an interview with Rosemary. Rosemary is from Michigan. I hope you enjoy the interview and maybe you'll learn something from it.
My name is Rosemary Linares, and I am located in Ann Arbor, Michigan. As you may know, Michigan is the United States High Five, so we're right here. And uniquely in this area of Michigan, there's a lack of USDA inspected slaughterhouses, which is really what initiated our journey to establish a new USDA inspected slaughterhouse in Southeast Michigan.
If you will, just walk us a little bit down that path of where you previously have experience and then what has brought you to this decision to open up a facility.
So it's been a long path. It's been a long journey. And just reflecting on it recently, I think it started for me when I was a young girl because my great-grandfather started a USDA inspected slaughterhouse really with a simple tree in his backyard. And so growing up, this was before I was alive, right? But growing up, we would have family reunions on the family property on my mom's side of the family. And at the picnics, I always liked to go have the slaughterhouse tour to go inside the slaughterhouse and see the carcasses hanging. And I think as a child, it's because it was hot outside and it was very nice and cool in the freezer. So I enjoyed that. So every year I looked forward to the slaughterhouse tour and just I think connecting with my roots in that way. And so I, fast forward, went to college and focused on a career in the nonprofit sector. And then 10 years ago, so at that point, I was married to my life and business partner, Damian. I call him Damian because our son is Damien. So there's two. When we got married, it was two Damians for the price of one marriage. So Damian is my husband, Damien is my son, and the business is Damien's Craft Meats. And so Damian is from Mexico originally, and he worked in butchering. So even when he was a young person, he was butchering animals and bringing home sometimes the offal to family to eat. And so he's passionate about meat, but was in a career in manufacturing. And we have a neighbor who said, "Hey, do you want to slaughter a goat?" And Damian said, "Yeah, I'd love to make some birria, which is this delicious goat dish." He did that, and it ignited a passion in him to be really closely connected to the food that we eat and connected to our farmer community here in Southeast Michigan. And as they say, it was all history. So then he quit his job and said, "I'm going to do this." He apprenticed at the USDA inspected slaughterhouse that was for my family, but my cousin had sold the slaughterhouse before Damian had this awakening. So that was not an option. And we knew we had to start anew. And we were passionate about this particular area because I am from this area. I grew up in Saline, Michigan, and now live in Ann Arbor. My mom lives here. We're rooted here. Our kids go to school here. We have two kids, a 20-year-old and a 9-year-old going on 20. So we're rooted in this community. We are involved in 4-H. And so it's been a long journey. To answer your question, how did this path start? It's been a 10-year journey where we were bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We're going to start a slaughterhouse, and then slowly learned that is an involved process, and it is complicated, and there are many regulations, and it's expensive. So throughout this process, we just remained steadfast in the vision to have this facility located here to focus on four-legged animals, to think about certifications like organic certification, animal welfare, humane handling, just being mindful about the power of our food and our food system, and also looking at the fragility of the food system as we think about the pandemic and how that impacted the meat industry in particular, not only for consumers who wanted to access tasty meat products, but also the farmers who had to euthanize tons of their meat because the facilities were shutting down, and thinking about the workers who were getting sick and dying as well. And so all of that has influenced the values that have helped drive us forward in this project over the last 10 years.
Absolutely. I appreciate you commenting on all of those facets because they are each in and of themselves extremely vital. So, what are some of the things that maybe you have learned in that process of the different facets of establishing this and getting it ready to actually come to fruition? What are some of the more surprising things that you have learned that are that more or more impactful things?
Ooh, we've learned so much. I mean, in 10 years, I think anyone can learn a lot, right? That's a lot of time to be learning. And we both value learning very much. So it's been a big learning curve from the business side of things, just understanding the language of finalizing our capital stack. And we have non-dilutive capital, and it's what is a subordinate lender? I didn't have those terms because of my nonprofit background. So luckily we're bilingual and we can easily learn a new language. So there was just the business side of the learning curve, and then the impact too in terms of locally. What is the demand for locally raised, sustainably raised regenerative practices and meat products that have a different flavor profile because they're grass fed? Or what is the difference when you know this particular heritage breed and the farmer who's raising the hogs of that breed and how that bacon tastes amazing? So it's been learning that way. So we joke that Damian does a lot of R&D, and our family is the direct benefactors of his testing out the different recipes. So the bacon and the sausage, and now he has these proprietary blends. So I think that's been an important learning. And then focusing in that my background and the work that I do with my consulting business, and predominantly my clients are nonprofit organizations across the country. And so thinking from a social justice lens, what are the implications for workers in the industry, for meat industry? And when we look at the workforce for the meat industry, they're predominantly immigrants, many Latinos, many Spanish speaking. And so what does it look like to develop a new business that really infuses equity from the very beginning and the ground up as part of a driving value, but also what does that look like practically in terms of policies? And so we're both bilingual, so training will be in English and Spanish, and policies will be in English and Spanish, and we can offer a culturally responsive atmosphere and environment for the workers, as well as thinking about different models that are innovative and new around employee ownership and sharing profits and open book management. And so we're looking into all of that as we design this model theoretically from the business model, but also the facility design and where are the welfare spaces so that folks can have access to windows, but in a practical way that it won't disrupt the work that they have to do, because it's very dangerous work. And so we respect the work. I think that's been another piece for me, learning about what's involved and feeling closer to the food that I eat, because I do enjoy bacon and meat, and I'm Cuban, so pork is a very important part of my culture and palate. So I think that it's important to know the process, just the entire process from start to finish of what foods do animals eat and what is their experience like in both life and death, and how can they live with dignity and also be treated with dignity, and how that impacts the flavor. So many learnings. I could go on forever about all the learnings because there's been so many.
I love what you highlighted, though. They are some of the key factors that I appreciated when I was learning about you, was some of those pieces to what you guys are bringing into the entire dialogue of your business and the culture you're creating there.
I was born in Ann Arbor, by the way, so I'm familiar with your area.
Nice. Did not know that. That's great. Thank you, Charlie, for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just going to say, Superior Farms in Denver, they're employee owned. So as far as models go, that's one to look into, because they have, I mean, for particularly Latino workers who come here, it gives them an opportunity to build equity for future generations, which is important. There was something I was going to ask you about. Do you, with your R&D, there is a significant difference between meats that are raised locally, grass-fed, heritage breeds. The flavor profile is different. A lot of people don't realize that. What in your research and development have you found that people prefer over the commercially raised? By that I just mean that we're all used to basically eating
Like
one
generic
breed.
grocery store?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, versus what is coming farm fresh.
In my consulting work, I really like this norm of both and. So it's both, there are different flavor profiles and there's a demand for all of it, right? And so one of the pieces that we've really grown to appreciate about knowing the farmers and the livestock that they raise and processing their animals and then being able to taste the differences and the nuances and the flavor, it's both the animal husbandry practices, the breed of the animal, the age of the animal, and then I think it's the value added processing that then Damian really infuses with his own special seasoning. And the flavors are just so dynamic. When I think, so I went to public schools and, you get a hamburger at school and like some special cheese, right? And being able to taste a hamburger from a grass-fed beef that grew up, a couple miles down the road, it's just different. I think it's different from a values perspective and just mentally knowing like this animal lived happily and looked at a pasture with like the most beautiful idyllic view every day, and until it was time for them to serve a purpose, which is to feed us. It's this sense of reciprocity, which in particular I think we've really picked up from our native brothers and sisters around. We're raising this animal and they're also gifting us something. So I think at that level, you can taste that. It just tastes different than when you go and pick up a Costco chicken, which I love a good Costco chicken. So it's that both and. We need all of it. And I think the demand for meat has increased and the demand for cheaper meat has increased. And so the pricing of locally raised meat can often feel a little heavier on the pocket. And it's an investment in the community. It's an investment in our environment. It's an investment in our values. And so I think it is that both and piece all the time.
Absolutely.
Do you, throughout this process, how many other small processors are there like you in your area? And do you feel that when it comes to food prices, when it comes to market access for farmers and for the consumer, how important are facilities like yours?
They're very important. So right now, local farmers who are in this area of Washtenaw County, Michigan, near Ann Arbor, they have to travel 70 miles one way to have their livestock processed. So that's a lot of time on the road one way to go drop the animals off, go home, go pick them up again. And so sometimes also, depending on who the end consumer is of their products, they may want to take them for further processing and packaging near Grand Rapids, which is like over here. So they are traveling great distances. So that's a cost of time and money for them. And so they're really excited, the local folks, around having a USDA inspected slaughterhouse nearby so they don't have to travel so far. And if folks want organic processing, that's also very far away. There are custom exempt facilities that are closer, but then the end user, they can't sell it across state lines. They can't sell it to a grocery store. So if they want that USDA inspection. And I think that also with the pandemic, local folks are just struggling to get slots for their animals to be processed. So they have to often project out into the future for a slaughter slot for an animal that's not even alive yet. And that's hard. That's a very difficult game to play because they don't know about the conditions of the weather or if the animal will be ready. So I think in this area, it's really important to have some more capacity. And I think the other piece is when we have 4 companies that process the majority of our beef and another 4 that process the majority of our pork, when we have local smaller farms that may have smaller herds, they just aren't able to enter the market if they don't have a place that can process. And so by expanding the smaller facilities, that opens up new opportunities for existing farmers, for new farmers. When we see the decrease in agriculture, particularly around livestock farms, we want to see that either sustaining or maybe growing, but not going down this trajectory that is decreasing, which is partly from the result of decades of consolidation in the meat industry, because that processing piece is integral to the meat value chain. We need them to be able to be slaughtered and processed. So we're excited to be a part of this moment and recognizing how it connects to our ancestry and makes us feel connected to our family legacy, to not only in the past, but what we're building for the future for our children and for our community.
So people are still having problems finding slots after COVID, and after these many years, which is pretty crazy, but it's true. I mean, it happens here too, but
When in doing your business preps, as you've been getting all of your ducks in a row, as they would say, you, I'm sure, have assessed, you were talking about the distance people are having to travel, but you also touched upon allowing new producers in. And so what are some of the ways you're structuring your facility specifically to allow a diversity of farmers? So perhaps we were talking about the different varieties of what you're going to be able to process there. Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah, so we have looked at some of Temple Grandin's concepts around how to be mindful of how we build the corral and the chute. And so with that, we also will have an opportunity for farmers with Texas Longhorns. So we can accommodate Longhorns. We'll be able to accommodate bison. So we want to be able to, and also sheep and goats and lambs. So there's a variety. And so there's some innovation that we have to incorporate in the design of the chutes. And we've traveled around to many slaughterhouses to check out different designs and setups and ask for the wisdom from those folks running those slaughterhouses. What would you do differently if you could do it? And so we've really customized the design of our facility and looked at food safety implications. We've looked at just generally having folks who specialize in this industry to help us to configure the design. And so as a result, we can accommodate a variety of different types of breeds and animals and livestock so that folks can rest assured that if they're in this area, they'll be able to have their animals processed from just a logistical standpoint. And then I think with new people entering, it's exciting to know that there is a place in their backyard, potentially in this area of Southeast Michigan, where if they wanted to raise livestock, they know they can go somewhere and be able to sell the meat products that result from their hard labor. And I think the other piece that we are looking at in terms of investing in the future is so 4-H. Our son is a member of 4-H. My family goes way back in 4-H. It may have skipped my generation. I did grow up in the suburbs and then head out to, New York City and Miami for a bit. So I didn't directly get involved in 4-H, but my son is really excited about his involvement. And so one of the things that my cousin did at his facility was give tours to the 4-H students so they could see what happens to your animal after the auction and after they leave the fairgrounds. And, I think that it sort of destigmatizes the process a little bit. And it is a process, being mindful that can be a hard lesson and experience for a youth. But at the same time, the more we can generate interest and connection to our food, the more people are ready to be invested in sustaining these systems like agriculture and farming. And we want that for our community.
Well, and you touch upon something that's very vital, I think, in that you even said 4-H kind of skipped my generation. So I think we've found that we're all coming back, that we have seen a lot of industrialization. We've seen a lot of consolidation, and how that diminishes the value of the entire ecosystem we're all a part of. And so bringing that education back into individuals' lives, I mean, you returned to it, and there was no XYZ that said you had to. In fact, your family got out of that business. But I appreciate that you're recognizing the value add that exists in knowledge and in being respectful of what we are consuming and sharing that knowledge with future generations, because I think that's vital.
There's also a lot of waste, I think, in food today because people have completely disconnected with their natural relationship with food. And I think that there is a natural relationship to caring for an animal and then eventually eating that animal. But people have lost that. They've lost the reverence of it. And because of that, there's a lot of waste, from hides to other things that could be easily put back into circulation and use, that we just don't do because our brains have been, trained to think of things differently. So it's really important to, at least, even with youth, get them in there to be able to see and understand the process and not be fearful of it or, turned off by it, but understand it and build a reverence for it. Sorry, my tongue twister today.
I really love that concept, though, of the reverence for the meat that we eat and the animal that provided that meat and consuming the whole animal as well. And I think that it's maybe slightly unique to the United States that we expect meat to arrive on a styrofoam platter, wrapped in saran wrap. And there's so much more to the story than that. And so, for example, Damian is really familiar with consuming many parts of the animal. And so in this area of Southeast Michigan, we have lots of communities that are interested in where can we buy beef tongue and where can we get beef feet and how can we get tripe and intestines and things like that. So it's also about identifying markets so that we can, as you said, eliminate that waste that is often produced and think about how can we eat different parts of the animal that are outside of the hamburger or like the steak, right? And then also, how are we thinking about with the waste that comes, like you can't eat the head. Well, you can eat the head. You can't eat like the spine. Like that is not USDA inspected. And so we're looking at having a biodigester to transform that waste back into energy. And so that's incorporated right now in our plan, but we'll see with more investigation just how much that costs, because I think in some cases it's newer technology in the meat industry, but people have been doing it and finding really great results. So that's, I think, another important component to think about. What is the waste that we're generating, even just in the processing?
Absolutely.
I have a question for you. You had mentioned organic processing. What makes processing organic? Because one would think, well, you're just cutting up meat, right?
Well, as Damian would say, it's easier for the processor to process organic than it is for the farmer, because the farmer has to go through a whole certification process that looks at the land, it looks at the feed, it looks at all of these various complex components. And for the processor, the animal is really only alive for a short amount of time before they're surrendered. And so I think the organic certification process for a processor is a little more simplified, but it still is a process, and it's one more administrative piece that can add value to the end user and to the farmer and the bottom line. But people may not want to go through it because it's one more bureaucratic process and red tape that exists when there's so many. So I think it's not to say that it's super simple, but it's also not as hard as it is for the actual farmer who raises an animal organic.
And my other question on the processing was, you were talking about making the facility accessible to Longhorns. This has been like our issue because we like raising heritage breed animals, but they come with things naturally that a lot of processors where we are just
don't deal with.
They don't deal with it. They don't want it. What kind of modifications did you have to do to be able to make that happen?
Well, in some ways, it's kind of simple, but it's also not. So we have the luxury, if it can be called that, with a lot of sweat equity, to design a new facility. And so we've incorporated then in that design a place where an animal with longhorns that wouldn't go through the normal chute can be segregated over to the side and then surrendered there, as opposed to going through the chute that most of the animals would be going through. And if a facility already exists, to make those types of modifications to their infrastructure would be pretty cost prohibitive. So a lot of the meat facilities, at least that I'm familiar with in Michigan, have existed for a really long time. And these grant opportunities through the USDA have been helpful so that they can perhaps improve and remodel and do some improvements to their infrastructure. But I think outside of already having that space in a facility, that may be hard for an existing slaughterhouse to incorporate. So that's why on the front end, we're doing that now. And I think that's also because Damian just has a range of experience working with different animals and different farmers. And that's part of the craft part of Damian's Craft Meats, is this customized approach and respect for each individual business and each individual animal.
Mm-hmm. Now, touching on the USDA grants and that whole dynamic, for example, working with Dave and Chris, can you speak at all to your experience working with them? How has that process been? How has it been helpful?
So we were on this journey before the pandemic. And when the pandemic happened and we saw the influx of $1 billion in the meat industry, we were thrilled. Like, oh, yes, we've been talking about this. This has been needed for a while. So we were excited about that recognition. And then to see that Flower Hill Institute, which is a Native-led nonprofit, and the technical assistance that they've been providing, which is free of cost to us. So I'm like, hey, Chris, let me email Chris and ask him some questions. And then getting to know Dave, and they did a lot of webinars. And I was like fangirling over Dave because like, oh, I've seen you so many times. Like, I feel so familiar with you. You don't know me yet, but I've appreciated the information you've shared. So the technical assistance piece is just really dynamic and such a value add for folks like me. Also, the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network. They have been, as an intermediary, so supportive, just such resources and sharing and knowledge and connections. And so we've been beneficiaries of their support and technical assistance as well through Chris Fuller and his company. So I think that the investment in providing the capacity building support for smaller processors has been the key to being able to match the need with the ability to manage grants, because managing a grant generally is challenging, but managing a government grant it's like a whole new level of challenging. And so having the technical assistance piece is brilliant, because as I've seen in the nonprofit sector, when you have funders matching capacity coaches with the grantees, they can be more successful, and we want them to be successful. We want these investments to last. So I've really enjoyed that. And then I would add too, I see them as part of my team, and we have a team. So Damian and I are at the forefront because it's our vision and we're working towards that, but we've built a strong and dynamic team that complements our strengths. And it's because of our team we've gotten to this point. We would not have gotten to this point if we hadn't had a previous USDA grant through the AMS Local Food Promotion Planning Grant, so that we could get a comprehensive feasibility study, business plan, preliminary facility design, and food safety plans. That started off our team. And then it was like, oh, we can partner with others that bring expertise to this project. And since then, now we have a pretty robust team with civil engineers and architects and wastewater management experts and meat plant experts and owners reps and real estate development. And I may forget someone, so I'm sorry if I forgot you from that list, because the team has grown, and that's how we're at this point, really.
So what's the future look like?
The future. So with the government grants go the NEPA review, the National Environment Policy Act review. And that is just one of those wild cards where you can't accurately predict when it will end. So I'm hoping with optimism and ambition that it could end by the end of this year, so that when the weather warms up again in 2025 in Michigan, we can start to prepare the land and get that construction going in the spring, summer of 2025. And then we'll have to build the building and pay attention to all the pieces, all of the very many details, and the weather, the things in our control and out of our control, so that we can build the facility and then open. And that is what we see in the future. And then I've got projections for my projections. So we're also, trying to do a little future telling. And, but I think it remains to be seen how we can test our theories and put them into practice when we really get going. So we're excited about it.
So you guys have taken a long time to get to this point where you're opening. What advice would you have for somebody that was interested in opening a meat processing facility that might help them shorten that time span?
I would probably be like, why are you doing this first? And make sure you're clear as to why, because you got to carry that forward along the journey. I think if you're not independently wealthy or already really deeply connected into the meat industry, coming into it as a newer or returning kind of business owner, it's hard. It comes with a lot of challenges, and it requires passion and dedication and tenacity. So I don't know if there are ways to shorten the timeline. We did a presentation and a webinar with our other contractor who helped with the business plan and the feasibility study, called Taking the Long View. It takes a long time to create a new system that's so complex. So I think if someone wanted a shorter entry into the market, buying an existing slaughterhouse would be a little faster. And it doesn't enable as much customization to the facility design, but you also have the benefit of an existing business, hopefully. And I think that I'm just someone that loves input and data and information. So I've enjoyed the planning process and gathering the data to support us to plan, because it's also such high risk. I want to be successful and know that I've put as much research into our success as possible. So I've heard stories of people who've kind of jumped into it without having that due diligence. And I would just also recommend, like, pay the money, take the time to do that. So you're really going into it prepared to be successful, because it is a high risk venture and it's not for the faint of heart. But my sense is that it can be really rewarding on the other side.
Have you found any particular benefits or challenges being a woman in the meat industry?
Yes. So much to say. How much time do we have? No.
All the time you want. No.
I think that generally we exist in a society that has systems that include barriers for people who are female. There's just that reality to start off with. And then when you layer that with the business sector and you layer that with agriculture, there aren't a whole lot of women in any of those areas, but then particularly meat processing. Often it might be the wives or partners of the meat processor who may have inherited the business, or maybe they started the business and the women have a role, or maybe they're like selling the meat, or they're doing like the back office support. But to be at the forefront and do the business strategy and the communications piece and be out in environments that are like, so we would go on family vacations and Damian would say, we got to go check out the local slaughterhouse. And I'm like, well, what shoes do I wear? I never had the right shoes. And so you get blood on them. So it's like from a wardrobe perspective, but it's much, much more than that, where being the only woman in the room is not something I'm usually used to, but often I might find myself in that kind of situation. And then when you layer that also with, I have a Latinx identity, I identify as Latina, Damian is very visibly Latino. And so there aren't a lot of people of color in the meat processing industry either. Not to see that there are none, but not a lot. And we don't really have data on how many either. So it's kind of anecdotal and based on observation. So I think that's part of the racial equity component, is gathering the data and disaggregating it to understand, what does the landscape look like? We don't have that conversation at the level of the USDA. In fact, I remember Secretary Vilsack came to speak to folks in Detroit, and he acknowledged they don't have that data. If we're talking about racial equity, they can't really point to, both from a farmer perspective, but like the processor's perspective. So it's trailblazing. It's making sure that for every moment of discomfort, I'm creating a trail so that other people can come alongside, and this can be a vibrant sector of really diversity. Because if we all eat meat, we all have a space here in this industry. So that's, I think my mindset is how can I help this be a place where people like me feel like we belong? And that hasn't always been my experience, and that's something that I'm striving for.
I think that was well said.
Yep.
You've done this once or twice.
Maybe.
I bet you're quite grateful. I know with us having a nonprofit, the grant portion, like you were saying, it's usually a whole other animal. It's if you don't have a grant writer specifically, or someone who's able to make those connections, it's very tedious and frustrating. So how has that been something that you found because of your degree and your experience? Has that given you kind of that extra oomph to be able to find resources? Or would you recommend for others to be working with someone who can make those connections?
That's a great question, Shauna. And I was just like viscerally experiencing some of the stress and frustration you've had, because it's not an easy world to write grants for yourself or for others. And absent an expert grant writer, that can be a challenge to even get the grants. And it's a lot of work, especially if you don't get the grant. And I think in writing so many grants, you don't get all of the grants. That's not how that works. So it's recognizing how much work it is. And certainly I think it's my background too. I remember in Take Your Daughter to Work Day, my mom took me to her job, and she was a fundraiser at the University of Michigan School of Nursing. And I was like, Mom, your job is so boring. I could never do that. And so I guess she must have instilled in me some skills and passion for grant writing and just the social sector. And so I think that it just comes to me naturally, writing. And so the grant writing piece in some ways is part of just my skill set as a generalist and as a consultant. So I think like it lent itself to this role of my life to be an entrepreneur and start a USDA inspected slaughterhouse, as one does. And so I think that I was able to merge my skill set, my passion around social justice, my consulting work and expertise with this venture at the point that I realized like I think at some point I was like, yeah, I'm supporting Damian. This is his dream. This is great. And then I was like, no, this is my dream too. This is for us. And I see that. So it was, I don't know. I think it was the unfolding synchronicity of the universe that I'm just uniquely fit to write some grants and get them and manage them and do all the things, which fortunately with the grants, then you can hire a team so that one does not have to do all of the things because there's just so many things. So I really admire people who don't have the whole team and are doing this on their own because it's a lot of hard work. And I think the other thing with the investment into the meat industry is there are folks who do write grants. So I partnered with one, and they looked at the grant that I had written and they gave me really helpful substantive feedback. And so knowing that they're out there and they can help other people write grants, and there are people who know how to manage grants. So the key that I've learned throughout all of this is to get a team because you don't have to do everything. And I say that like kind of doing a lot of the things. Maybe that's my personality. Maybe that's because I'm the eldest. I don't know. So, there's a lot of self-reflection on this journey as well. It's like a self-improvement process as well as a business venture because I'm always learning. So thank you for that question, because I think that it's not like you can just go write a grant and you're golden. It requires a lot of work and understanding of how that world works too.
Absolutely. And it's very specific to what you're trying to get to do, so it does take a lot of investigation into all of the bits to understand. And something you had said, so you were talking about how you were able to connect and make a team. What were some of the things what were some steps you took? Where did you go? What websites, or, what were some areas that propelled you forward to understanding, hey, these are the people I could work with?
I think just with this question, thank you. Reflecting back on that process of building the team, there were a lot of women involved. And maybe I subconsciously sought out women experts in these areas, or maybe because of who I am, we crossed paths. But I think that there is, starting with one person who is also in this area and is working on starting a poultry processing plant. She's also a grant writer. She's like, you got to write these grants, do these grants. I was like, oh, yeah, okay. So started writing the grants, got the grants, and then was able to hire a dynamic team called New Venture Advisors out of Chicago, but they operate nationally. And they have been so instrumental in helping us. And so then once we got the pieces you need to share with a bank, like the pro forma and complex like spreadsheets for days with tabs, all of it. And like they put them together and they helped me understand them. That was so helpful to then also, I think there's a piece which is to just, and this is what I've said to Chris and Dave, that they're like my counselors and my therapists, because this is not an easy kind of linear path. It's very circuitous. And I've needed some champions and cheerleaders to just keep me going, because it is so hard. And it's disheartening when you spend weeks of your life writing a grant and then not getting it, right? And so when people just continue to support us, that's been helpful. And then the other folks, like our attorney is female. And I don't know. I think that, again, that conscious, like build a team so that others can get into this space is important. Not to say that the attorney wasn't already in this space, but I think it's also translated to other areas of my business, where I helped a nonprofit get $1 million grant through the state for the labor and economic opportunity for a capital campaign. So now I'm starting to build expertise in capital campaigns. So I think that I've been really guided by this value of abundance. And the more that I learn and receive from others, the more I want to give and pay it forward. And so that, I think, really has been part of a mindset of growth and abundance that has helped me find people who share that value. And then we work together because we know that what we're doing is ultimately going to make this world better than when we found it. And so I think that's really my secret to building the team and finding the right folks because of the value alignment and passion.
Absolutely. And you hit the right chord there specifically. Well, not that you wouldn't hit, but the value that you pay forward, that whatever blessing and goodness you're receiving, that you are that conduit to propel forward, is, I think, a really important piece that not a lot of people vocalize as an instrumental piece to building any team and being successful in general, in my opinion. But
yeah. And there's a moment this week. So we had this article come out in our local newspaper, but it's also a digital version. And my son, who is dyslexic, was with his tutor, and his tutor found the article and they read it together. So I hadn't even thought to show him the article, but his tutor did. And then he was telling Damian and I that night what he learned from the article and how excited he was to be a part of that and how he wants to contribute to this as well. And I just had a moment where I'm like, yes, this is why we're doing this. Like, this is so worth all of the sleepless nights and the stress and the gray hairs, because for him, but also, again, just the broader, as you said, paying it forward and making sure that our community can benefit from the labor that we have to offer makes me feel really gratified and fulfilled.
is there anything else that you want to speak to? Anything else you want to say in regards to this business that you're building?
Thank you for that question, too. I think that we're always eager to meet folks who are interested in this type of project, whether that's learning more about it, if they're interested in investing, if they're interested in making connections. We have enjoyed, the other piece I would say about making our team is that it was word of mouth and warm introductions and connections most of the time. And so I think that has lent itself to building the strong team that's also rooted in trust and transparency, because there's like someone who knows someone. And so we're interested in meeting more people and continuing to add to our network if folks want to reach out to us. And we're grateful for this opportunity to speak on your podcast and to continue to share information about our project and about this work in general, and to meet folks who are doing important work as well. Meet your neighbors. That sounds, when I read that, I thought, oh, that's just like, yeah, like what a return to a traditional value that we get away from in our modern day technology filled society. And as someone who is addicted to TikTok, I love the premise of just hearing at length the podcast and stories that people share from their experiences. So I'm grateful for folks like you who are out there talking to people and building community virtually and across the country around these shared values. So I'm thankful for this opportunity to get to speak to both of you. I'm glad that Chris let us know that this was a moment. And then I think that profiling female entrepreneurs in this space is also a generous way to look at the narratives and how narratives are expanding and growing, and to hear stories that we don't often hear in the mainstream. So I'm just grateful for this opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're grateful for you.